Welcome to Breaking Down Bits, a conversation about great comedy bits with the comedians who wrote and performed them.
Hey, Breaking Down Bits. I'm Brian Gendron.
Hey, I'm Drew Jordan, and we are pumped about this episode. We're having a lot of fun. Episode 3. It's really happening. This has been great.
Yes. Off a great episode with Joel Byers. Probably a good time to get into callbacks, things that we learned from Joel. How about you? What'd you get?
I think for me, the callback for the Joel Byers episode was just a reminder that although you may be on stage solo and maybe a lot of comedy is on your own, it's not wrong or a bad idea to work with other comics and kind of work out jokes, accept people's tags when they give them to you, and just be collaborative in the background, even though you want to own at the end of the day, obviously your material and your point of view and all that stuff. Be open to, collaboration in the background. I think that was the cool takeaway. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why we call it community. I think Joel's done a better job than anybody in creating this digital online community for comics. I myself participated in 3 Drew daily write 10 clubs. And I'm not going to lie. The first one, I was stumped. I didn't come up. It was the right 24 hour for me. I couldn't come up with anything for 24 hours for the word water. Yesterday, much better. That's what it is. It's about working those calisthenics, writing every day, and having that accountability. So if you have not checked out Hot Breath and the Right 10 Club, go check it out. Great place to get it. And then of course, go back and listen to the podcast. It was our last episode. Subscribe, like, share, Apple, Google, YouTube. We made it easy for you to go out and find us. So get out and get it. And it's evergreen content, guys. It's all about comedy, trying to make you better comedians as we all learn together. So, absolutely. Drew, like you said, you're excited about today.
Yeah, this was kind of an interesting connection. I would say it all started with me in a Google search, and maybe you've done this search as well. It's how to write jokes. Click. And you just hope to find something good out on the internet. And we all know that, I hope I'm not being too blunt here, but like 9 times out of 10, the stuff you find is not really all that helpful. I found something called the Joke Writing Cheat Sheet, a free resource provided by Mr. Scott Dikkers. And that led me down the rabbit trail of learning more about him, reading his books, connecting with him on social. He has been an incredible encourager. Even when he's liked so many of my posts, commented on things, encouraged me to keep writing and doing other things. And we didn't even know each other. So I know he is passionate about helping people write great comedy. He's passionate about writing it himself. I'm so pumped. Let's get into this conversation with Scott Dikkers on Breaking Down Bits.
Scott Dikkers is an accomplished comedy writer, speaker, and entrepreneur. He was the co-founding editor and longtime editor-in-chief of The Onion. He won a Peabody Award for his Onion News Network web series. He's authored several New York Times best-selling books and inspired writers and entrepreneurs alike through his book series How to Write Funny and his Comedy Business School.
Bring him in, the man that we came here to hear from, Mr. Scott Dikkers.
Hey,
Scott,
guys.
how are you?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on this podcast. It's definitely, this is a new podcast from 2 newer comedians. You didn't have to say yes. We really appreciate you stepping in here to share some of your wisdom today. Super excited. As I kind of mentioned, my first interaction with you was through this. I'm a nerd enough that I printed it out. Mm-hmm. And I love this resource. And this is one of the big things we'll be chatting about today.
Great.
The 11 funny filters. And just want to say thanks for what you bring to this comedy community. I think you bring something really special. Like I said, a lot of people out here trying to share advice, but I think your advice rang very true to me, very helpful to me in my writing. And even through your book, Outrageous Marketing, you know, some of the personal stories that you share kind of behind the scenes of the, you know, the progress and the creation of The Onion, very insightful and very helpful in a in a personal, like, internal way. I go, I'm not such a weirdo. Other people think like me too, and love the things that I love. So thanks for being so transparent in all the ways.
You are very welcome, and thanks for saying all that. And you had me right. Like, I'm really passionate about comedy. I'm really passionate about trying to make it better. And the thing that inspires me most in this whole world is bad comedy. Like, anytime I see comedy being done poorly, I just want to help. I just want to say, hey, could you just, you know, tweak it this way or do this or keep working, you know, keep going, keep working on. So yeah, you guys are doing amazing. You guys are doing great. And I'm delighted to be on your show.
So is that why you were commenting on all my posts, because
No,
you were inspired?
No, you're doing good. You're doing really good.
Oh gosh, no! Thank you so much for coming on. But Brian, maybe we should just hop right into these opening questions that we typically open with, so we can get things cracking.
Yeah, let's go. So our first question is right off the top. We keep it very open-ended. Quite simply, Scott, how does Scott Dikkers write comedy?
Yeah, so the way I write, I'll start with process. So my process isn't something I can turn on. Like, there's a preliminary investment that has to be made. So I have to have a good schedule. I have to free up my time. I can't be too busy with a bunch of crap. So I have to delegate things that aren't things that I should be focusing on, so that I have time to sit down and actually work. Because a lot of times people will say, well, I don't have time to, you know, write jokes every day or whatever. And you just have to make that time. So once I make that time, the way I use that time is to start, I just start writing. So like the morning pages exercise is a very important exercise for me. Whenever I need to write, and for a lot of my career, I haven't really had to produce a lot of writing. I was an editor mostly. So I would look at other people's writing and I would improve it. But whenever I would be called upon to like write a TV pilot, or I had to write a story or something like that, doing the morning pages exercise for a few days would rev me up, and it would get the wheels going, and comedy would just pour out of me. And so the way I write it then is I just pour out a rough draft as fast as I can of whatever it is I'm trying to write. If it's a list of jokes, I'll just write 10, 20 jokes fast as I can without even thinking about it. And I'll try to do that every day. So after a week, I've got like, you know, 140 jokes. I go through and I find the best 10 or 20 and I tweak them or whatever. And then I've got a pretty decent list of 20 jokes. If it's a piece, then I let it sit and I go back and read it later and fix it, you know, see what I can do to make it better. I'm not one of those people that's going to pour over a first draft or stare at a blank piece of paper for 2 hours without typing anything, or typing a sentence and then deleting it. I'm going to pour out a first draft. I'm going to get that sucker written, because that first step of just getting it on the page, no matter how crappy it is really important. And just embracing that it's going to be crap, and knowing that the good part comes later when you're able to sift through all the crap and find things that you can work with and finesse or whatever. So after I finesse, you know, I show it to people. I make sure in comedy, this is not art, this is entertainment. Other people have to like it. So I get feedback from other people and I balance that against my own internal judgment, and then I put it out. It's basically how I do it.
That's a really interesting distinction, art and entertainment. Because I think some people would say that stand-up comedy is art, and if you don't get it, then it's kind of like it's your bad. Well,
there's performance art. Have you ever seen performance art? Like that's Albert Brooks calls that stand-up comedy without the jokes.
Okay, sure.
And that's art. You know, that's somebody expressing themselves, and God bless them. You know, I'm just not interested in that.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned is writing, and it resonates with me because it was in your book. It was big. Quantity to get to quality was something that sticks with me. And you have to have the discipline, like you said, to do it every day, to get through the crap, to find that gold, and then continue to refine and process that gold.
Absolutely. Yep. That's how it works.
So that's awesome. Perfect.
One thing I wanted to ask, since you are known for multiple, I guess, comedy in multiple mediums. You were a cartoonist. You obviously well known for your work at The Onion. You've also done stand-up. You've done, I mean, pretty much every style of comedy that can be done. You've spent some time there. So nowadays, maybe you can just help me figure this out. As a comedian, we don't just perform on stage anymore because of social media. We're kind of looking for ways to connect on Twitter through text, connect on maybe Instagram, Facebook through images. Sometimes you find that a joke that kills on Twitter doesn't work on stage. Or how do you see the difference in, or have you kind of cracked why some jokes work visually versus verbally? Is that something that you've ever wrestled with?
Actually, I'm with you. Like sometimes you just don't know what's going to work in one medium versus another medium. That's why you always have to try out your jokes and workshop them and get feedback on them and test them in front of audiences if you're going to do that. But this is why I always start with people. Like a lot of people come to me and they'll take my classes or whatever, and they'll learn comedy from square one. Like they don't know anything. I always start them with writing jokes in prose. Because in my opinion, that's the absolute hardest way to make something funny. Because when you go out and you perform it, you've got all sorts of other tools you can use that you don't have in writing. You can adjust the timing, you can adjust your attitude, your delivery, how you look, how funny is your voice, how funny do you look? There's so many things. You're connecting, you're bonding with them, you're like right next to them on a stage. That makes people want to laugh more. But when it's just like symbols on a page, like that is really tough. So if you can crack that, once you get on stage, it's going to be easy. There's going to be some jokes that aren't going to work, but you at least have a baseline, you have a foundation where you kind of know the craft, So to me, that's the difference between the two as far as what makes one work and what makes one not work. Yeah, that's anybody's guess. Like you kind of have to put it out there and see what people will respond to.
Yeah, it sounds kind of similar to what I've heard hearsay, what Chris Rock does when he's working new material. They say that he'll go out and just read his new jokes with no verbal affect at all. And he'll just very boringly kind of deliver the jokes to see if they get a reaction, because he doesn't want, he knows how strong his performance aspect is. And so
that's going to be the icing on the cake once he does it. That's how we do it at The Onion for 30 years. We've been reading the headlines in a meeting in the most flat, monotone voice, the most boring voice, because we know that once it's on the front page and nice typesetting with a big funny picture and everything else, it's going to be funnier. So we want to make sure it kills when it's read by the most boring person in the room in a monotone. So yeah. We do the exact same thing.
Interesting.
The Peabody Award that y'all won for the work you did with the Onion Network, wasn't that part of the chemistry that made that so great? Was the person that you hired to report and had that dry monotone delivery?
We had a lot of different news anchors. A couple of them were like real news anchors because you need that authenticity,
Right.
But we had this one guy, Peak was his name, just beautiful, just like, I think he was just an actor. He wasn't a newscaster, but he looked like one. He got it. Like, do you ever see newscasters in movies when they'll cast an actor to play a newscaster? And it's always wrong. It always feels like they're just acting like a newscaster. You need a real newscaster. Yeah. And this guy got it. And we did this thing with The Onion for many years called the Onion Radio News. And we hired this guy. He was a once in a lifetime find. He had done AM radio news for old people radio stations. So he had the most square, this is the news at the top of the hour. It was fantastic. But in his side hustle, he was a brilliant cartoonist and humorist and humor writer. So he totally got all the jokes. And we did these Onion news bits for probably 2 decades and syndicated them to, news stations all around. Howard Stern used to play them. They were so funny because he would read them in that dry voice. And it was really fun just to try to get through the recording to see if you could bust him up, because some of them were just so absurd. But those things are around. I'm sure you could find some of those. I love those things.
Awesome.
You just did something back there that we've left off of all of your biographical stuff we put out there. You're a pretty accomplished voice actor.
I have done that as well. Yeah.
And if I remember, some of that started back when you were before you didn't graduate high school. The prank calls and making tapes with your friends.
Sure
We should have lined up. We should have lined up a prank call today.
That's true.
That would have been. When's the last time you made a prank call?
Boy, I think since I was a kid. Since I was a kid, I haven't done it. It is really fun. That, you know, those like Jerky Boys things got really popular for a while. I don't know. It sort of felt like it's a kid thing. It's such a kid thing to do. You know, like what adult is going around doing that?
Crank Yankers. That's who. Yeah.
Crank Yankers. Yeah, so they made a whole show about it. Those are fun times.
Oh yeah, I definitely did that. Not to the talent level that Scott did though. I heard one where you come on the radio as Ronald Reagan, and
this was back when he was president. That's how old I am. And
Yeah,
I did an
killed it.
impression of him, and they put me on the air, and I took questions from listeners, and they really thought I was the president. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you clearly a strong vocal talent, because I was like expecting, he's, because you were like 19, 20, something like that when you were doing this, and I was not expecting it to be so spot on. I was like, wow, I wish I could do voices.
Oh, did you hear it?
I did, yeah.
Oh, because I clipped it in the audiobook.
Yes,
right.
it's in the audiobook, yeah. 'Cause I don't read words, I listen to books.
No, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
That's
But
funny.
thanks for including that. It really brought that story
Sure.
home.
Yeah, I didn't get permission from any of those people, those radio DJs.
They're
Screw
fine.
them. Yeah, they'll never hear it. They don't care. Audible doesn't care.
Yeah. Hey, the one thing we really want to get into, and the thing that maybe made the biggest impact on me, and just kind of like, I would say it might be one of the most powerful, comedy writing tools that I've come across to help me write, has been this 11 funny filters. Talk to us a little bit about how you came up with that, because it just seems to work so well. It gives me so many options when I'm writing. Once I have a good starting place, man, what a cool tool. What were the beginnings of that?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. So there's a few comedy teachers out there who all have their methods, and I think they're all wonderful and valid. And I think everybody who wants to write jokes should partake of all of them to see what fits. The reason I came up with mine the way I did is because I wanted something that was really broad and could encompass pretty much any kind of humor that you wanted to write. It wasn't limited to late night jokes. It wasn't limited to stand-up jokes. It wasn't limited to any category of humor, like humor for kids or humor for adults or satire or whatever. It encompassed everything. And the way I came up with it was after editing The Onion for on and off for like 20 years, and doing all of the other comedy that I had done, the radio comedy, the cartooning, the movies that I made, the scripts I'd written, everything, books. I felt like I knew how to do it. I felt like I really knew the craft. And there were certain terms that we would use at The Onion in the meetings talking about certain types of humor. We talk about the misplaced focus in a joke. We talk about the wordplay, the reference, this sort of stuff. And so I just, over time slowly compiled these tools, these funny filters, I call them. I had to name them because we didn't have a name for them. But I realized the way you come up with a joke is you come up with an idea that you want to communicate, whatever your subtext is. Usually it's just some opinion about your life or life in general. I hate soup, that's your opinion. You make that into a joke by filtering it through one or more of these 11 different filters. And I determined that there were no others. This is it. There's no other way to professionally craft humor other than these 11 different ways. And you can mix and match them so you can come up with an infinite number of combinations to make, totally original jokes. So while it seems like a formula, it is kind of a formula. You saw that joke cheat sheet. It's by no means formulaic, because it makes you more creative, because it allows you to draw humor from elements that you might not have considered. Like you might have a pretty good joke, and then it's like, oh, I could add a dash of shock to this. All right, if I just add a reference to the human butt, this joke would be a lot funnier, because that happens where you have a joke that's pretty good, but it just needs a little oomph,
Yeah.
So I decided to write a book when I left the Onion, where I just spelled it all out. Just like, okay, no more humor. I'm just going to give out the recipe and make it very clear, very plain. Here's how you do it. And I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know what to expect from that book. I self-published it on Amazon with zero fanfare, zero marketing, and it just kept selling, and it kept selling more and more and more.
Wow.
And it's a real perennial. And, you know, I get emails from people every day saying, oh my God, it helped me so much to write jokes. And, because I guess nobody else had really thought it through that deeply and really spelled it out that clearly. So I just got lucky that I was the first to do it. And I kind of built this whole teaching program around the book, because before I left the Onion, we had started this partnership with the Second City Training Center in Chicago, where I was teaching courses where I'd use some of the same lingo and some of these same ideas. So the book kind of became the basis of that curriculum. And then I left there, and now I'm teaching on my own online. But, you know, that's kind of like a little side business that I run, where I teach comedy and sell these books. So.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing book, and I agree,
Well,
totally helpful.
That's a good transition. We're going to actually look at some of the Onion headlines that you've edited or created over the years, looking at those 11 funny filters. So if you can humor us, the first of the funny filters is irony. So share a little bit about irony, and then we'll share the headline, and we'll move through these.
Yeah, irony is real simple. It's just take the opposite of your literal meaning, and that becomes a joke. So if your literal meaning, go back to my stupid example, I hate soup, it's I love soup. Like, so then that would turn into an article about how soup is so awesome. Like, soup is the greatest food ever, and here's why. Just like, that's your joke, and you run with it, and you buy into it, you play it straight, and that's how irony works.
Buy into it and play it straight are two keys you hit on. Let's look at
Very
this.
important.
Let's look at this article here. Alcoholic father disappointed in pothead son. It's okay.
So yeah, people who know irony know that that is ironic, because they are the same. They both are addicted to something, but the father is ironically disappointed in his son. So as I mentioned before, these funny filters work really well when they're layered. So irony is a big one here, but there's also reference, because we've all seen that situation. Like, that's kind of a stereotypical father-son relationship, where the father is this blue-collar drunk and his son is a layabout pot smoker that the dad thinks is lazy and should get off the pot, you know? So there are two funny filters working there, and a few others too. Like, any story in the Onion uses the parody filter also, because it's a parody of a newspaper article. So that's actually one of the great things about the Onion, is that when you write any story in the Onion, it automatically has 2, sometimes 3 funny filters going for it before you've written word 1. It has parody, it has character, because the Onion is a character. It's a classic comic archetype, the braggart captain fool, the bumbling authority is what I call it, which is an authority, a serious newspaper that spouts nonsense. So everything is just elevated. Everything in there, it just gets funnier.
You know, and if you apply that to stand-up, it's really important that you establish your voice and your identity, whether it's working off an archetype like you just mentioned, the bumbling authority, or for me, it's the dad, kind of, you know, the smart-ass dad and husband.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Then everything through that lens can become funnier using these filters.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just another, I think of it as like another piston that you're firing to make the comedy funnier.
So you hit on our next example, or the next filter.
Reference.
And actually, I've got
character.
Character. Yes. Character. So tell us a little bit more about character. You mentioned an archetype. Maybe we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah. The way character works is really simple. You just have to come up with a made-up character that's not yourself, that is either an established character archetype who people have historically loved, and there are many. I'm actually working on a book right now called How to Write Funny Characters, which lists them all and how to use them. Because I saw a book like this that was called The 8 Characters of Comedy, because there's so many characters that reoccur on sitcoms. But I've got at least 30, because I see these characters all the time, and I wanted to just sort of explain how to write them and how they work and why they're funny and all that. But so you invent a character and then you tell your joke through that character. And when you establish that character's traits, which you do when you make them an archetype, or if they're not an archetype, if they just give them a couple of traits, then when you show them acting on those traits, that's funny. People like seeing a character act the way they're supposed to. And you've already talked about irony and character. Combining those two gives you character irony, which is when a character acts in exactly the opposite way that you expect, which is very funny for the audience, but you have to first establish the character. So like in The Wizard of Oz, when the Scarecrow gets his brain, see, he's been dumb the whole movie, and when he gets his brain, he rattles off that mathematical equation. That's funny because it's character irony.
This can be a tough one for me. I think sometimes when I'm going through the funny filters and I have like a little subtext idea in my head, sometimes it's hard to inject character in there. For me, it's so much easier to notice it and appreciate it. Sometimes writing it is tough for me. That's a tough one for me to sometimes generate.
Yeah, for a stand-up, I think Brian's right that it's like, what's your comic persona? Know who you are as a character and make sure all your jokes make sense coming from you. Like Rodney Dangerfield was the master of that. He knew who his character was. He was the guy who didn't get any respect. So every single one of his jokes was about a guy not getting any respect. So you're meant to laugh at his misfortune. And that's his whole shtick. And it works beautifully.
When you do introduce other characters in your stand-up, I love that you said limit it to a few. And I think in the book you said 1 to 3 characteristics
the traits,
that make them funny. Yeah, because if you go overboard on that, then you lose them. That's
too many.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, comedic characters aren't complicated like dramatic characters. You don't want to know their whole backstory. They're just cardboard cutouts. Like think of Will Ferrell in any movie. He's a man-child, or he's a bumbling authority, and that's about it. Like simple archetypes. A great one that I always think of is Indiana Jones, because those movies are comedies. They're just very simple, two-dimensional movies. They're not serious dramas. They're not Sophie's Choice. And his character traits are, he has 2 archetypes. He's a fighter, meaning he solves his problems with his fists. Number 2, he's a know-it-all. So he's like a professor that knows everything. And number 3, he hates snakes. That's it. That's it. He has no more traits.
Very true. I love the way that you note, the way that really connected with me on characters was the Looney Tunes characters are all archetypes.
Totally.
And once that clicked to my brain, I was like, this is so, and it's like, you start to have way more respect for these people who came up with these Looney Tunes because they're so just based on basic, I forget the archetypes that you mentioned in the art, is it?
It's a Commedia dell'arte. It's the Italian Renaissance theater where a lot of these Western literature character archetypes originally came from, but they would have been discovered anyway. And I would guess that the people in the Warner Brothers studio came up with them just by horse sense. Like they weren't studying the Commedia dell'arte. They would try out a character and they would see how the audience reacted to their short and they'd be like, oh, they like that one, let's bring them back. So it was like a natural attrition of the characters that people love, which is exactly what that Renaissance theater was. Things like the bumbling authority or the trickster or the dummy or the Lothario, like Pepe Le Pew. It's a wonderful stable of characters that every comedian should know and study.
Love it.
Let's take a quick look at an Onion article that paints the example: philandering string theorist can explain everything.
Yeah.
So good.
So the character is a philandering string theorist. So we know he has 2 traits. He's a string theorist and he is a philanderer. So what does the joke do? It shows him acting on both of those traits at the same time. He philandered and he got caught and he can explain everything because string theorist. So there's a double entendre in there as well, which is a type of wordplay. But that's it. That's a very simple, basic character joke that just shows, it establishes a simple character and it shows him acting on his traits. That's it.
In the length of a headline, Drew. That's beautiful. All right.
Yeah. Gosh.
Number 3, and we're going to take you back with this example. all the way back to the in print days. And this isn't for kids, but we're going to talk about shock. And let's shock them right off the top with our example. This is holy shit. Man walks on the fucking moon. Holy living shit. This is a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. Obviously, The Onion was not in print in 1969. That's right. That's from a book, from a book that we did in the late 90s called Our Dumb Century, where we did fake Onion headlines throughout the entire 20th century. Great book. And yeah, so shock is the judicious use of sex or swearing or violence or anything shocking in mixed company. Almost always gets a laugh. And it's a little bit of a cheap laugh. It's a little bit of an easy laugh, especially with the demographic of young boys. They really enjoy that particular funny filter. So the kind of watchword of shock is to use it in moderation. You know, a lot of comedians work clean. A lot of other comedians know that the F-bomb can be a crutch. And if they start using it every other word, it's like loses its meaning. So something like that, Onion headline, the shock is in service of the deeper subtext. So the subtext that we were trying to communicate there wasn't it just fucking amazing that man walked on the moon? And there's a little bit of irony there too, because at the time, yes, the newspaper headlines were big, but Neil Armstrong's words on the moon and all the newscasters talking about it were very calm. And they were very like, the man has taken his first steps on the moon and all this stuff. And Cronkite. And we thought, you know what, that's just not appropriate to the bigness of this event. It needed us. And in journalism too, it's another like inside journalism joke. There's a type of headline in newspaper journalism called the holy shit headline. And so we decided, well, if any story deserves the holy shit headline, it's that one. So just run holy shit in the biggest possible type and you're set.
It feels like there's a lot of misuse of that holy shit headline these days.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like every story in the 24-hour news cycle is, you know, William Barr testified. Come on, who cares? You know?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
man.
good stuff. Let's move into the next example. This has a little bit of shock in it too. I'm going to show this here on the screen. So the hyperbole is our next example. And if you can see that here, NRA calls for teachers to keep loaded gun pointed at class for entire school day.
Yeah.
Hyperbole. I love that. That picture is what really drew me into this one.
Yeah, so that's an interesting example because I don't think it's a great hyperbole joke, because the best hyperbole jokes exaggerate to the point of impossibility. And this is actually possible, which I don't like about it. The best hyperboles are they defy the laws of physics.
Yeah.
Like, go back to Rodney Dangerfield. He said, my doctor tested my urine, it had an olive in it. So impossible. And that's what makes it funny.
I think this is a fun one to use to punch up a joke. If you go back, sometimes when I go back and look at my jokes, I realize I can turn up the contrast on this bit and it becomes wildly funnier. Yeah. And sometimes this is a great technique for a tag. You know, you kind of just keep pushing further and further and further until you get to maybe to that impossible level. I love this one as a way to tune up an old joke that you already kind of like.
Yeah. I was just telling Brian earlier, I just talked to Patton Oswalt for my podcast, and we were talking about hyperbole because I think he's really good at ramping up the hyperbole with every beat of a bit, where it gets so absurd that by the end, you almost wouldn't be getting those jokes if you hadn't gone along the ride because it's been so hyperbolized. Right. And that's hard. Writing hyperbole is one of the hardest types of jokes, but when you do it well, it's like, it feels like a really solid professional comedy joke, you know? It's like it's unmistakable.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next filter, number 5, which is wordplay, which is always a fun one. Let me go ahead and share an example from The Onion. Frito-Lay cuts off diplomatic relations with Snackistan.
Yeah.
I'm getting better at reading these.
Yeah. So wordplay gives people a lot of trouble because they think, well, isn't that just puns? And like they have a hard time working it into their bits. And it doesn't seem very sophisticated because puns typically those are like bad jokes from elephant joke books and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there are ways to do it, and there are ways to do it well. And you were talking about Chris Rock earlier. I saw him do one on his recent special. It's really nice little wordplay dropped right in there. He was talking about how God makes mistakes. And he was like, Mississippi, that's a mistake. He said, Mistake. Just a nice little wordplay joke he dropped in. Like, you can't dwell on wordplay too much, but you can drop it in here and there, and people will appreciate kind of the mathematical puzzle aspect of a wordplay joke. That story you showed there, that's a type of story. I think that was the first one we ever did, where we just do an assault of the puns, and we just try to put as many puns in a story as humanly possible.
I had a teacher one time, a comedy friend, teacher guy, suggest that maybe, or maybe it was, I read it somewhere. It could have been you, so I apologize if I'm quoting you to you, but maybe a pun is maybe a joke without this. It's lacking the subtext. It's just the face value only.
Yeah, I do say that.
Okay.
Wordplay only works with subtext. Like, you have to have good subtext. And the subtext of that Frito-Lay article is that Americans don't care about what's happening in Asia or the Middle East. They only care about eating snacks.
Right.
So,
Which is, it's so funny to take. I think one of the things that makes The Onion and your comedy so interesting is that you're willing to take a risk like that. Like that on its face, if, maybe people wouldn't have pushed to find the gem in that thought, like, oh, Americans don't care about overseas, they care about snacks. That's a very like interesting thing to like put your foot down and go, okay, how can I make this work?
Right. Well, sometimes you come up with a joke first and then you see the subtext in it. And that's true. I think that was the case with that one. It was just on the list and nobody liked it but me. I thought like, oh, that could be really stupid and funny. Like, comedy writers never want to do a stupid joke. They always want to do a smart joke. But I think sometimes you have to do a stupid joke because audiences love them. And especially if it has smart subtext, like, why not?
Sure.
I think that just like you said in the last one, Drew, that in stand-up, wordplay is great for tagging. It's really great. If you can keep the string of subtext going through fun wordplay, it works really effective, like Chris Rock did in your example. So.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Let's move on to our next one. You were trying to get to this one earlier, and it is reference.
Reference. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sir.
a big one.
So I found this one. Tip of area man's tongue refuses to relinquish Richard Crenna's name.
Yeah.
Now maybe an outdated reference, but
yeah, Richard Crenna. He played Colonel Troutman in First Blood with Sylvester Stallone, and he was in I think he was in the Top Secret movie with the Zucker brothers, if I'm not mistaken. Amazing actor. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, that a reference is a little observation. Jerry Seinfeld built his entire stand-up career on this. George Carlin to a great extent as well, especially early, of just these little moments in life that the comedian recognizes and communicates to the audience. And the audience is like, oh, I've experienced that little thing. They love that reference and it makes them connect with the comedian. And so sometimes all you have to do is point it out. You just point out the little thing that you've noticed that no one else has noticed. That's all it takes.
That is I think that comedy that's the kind of stuff that blows my mind from time to time when you like someone references something. It's almost like when your phone, you're like, you swear your phone is listening to you.
Right.
Like, because something comes up, you haven't said it to anyone. You've never had the conversation. Then all of a sudden some comic comes out with the joke and you're like, and it's connective too. It's totally very connective. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the beauty of that.
I never know if I'm doing this in the right order, so forgive me if this is out of order, but it's where you take the subjective and make it something that we all accept as subjective and make it objective, or am I flipping that? Is that backwards?
Oh, I don't know that reference.
Well, either way,
Um,
so take something like a necktie, and a necktie is very formal because we all accept it to be formal, but it's kind of a silly piece of clothing if you look at it, right? And so
oh, I see. Like a changing the perspective. I feel like that's a way to come up with subtext. Like if your
yeah,
subtext could be like, isn't a bow tie a weird clothing item? Like that's perfect subtext to start um, coming up with jokes on, to see where you can
Mm.
go with that.
so sticking a reference on top of that. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, come
that's
up with some
helpful.
kind of reference about the types of people that wear bow ties, or under what circumstances would you ever wear one? Just starting to think of things like that. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. That's a fun thread to pull.
totally.
Very
Teddy
helpful.
bear, teddy bear should have a bow tie.
This one's kind of fun, guys. We're going to get into Madcap. So I'm
Oh
going to
yeah,
share.
it's one of my favorites.
So and I love this headline. Secretary of Agriculture attends diplomatic meeting with foreign cabbage, and
Yeah,
there's a picture of the cabbage.
yeah,
So ridiculous.
If you grew up with, and I think probably you will reference this, but like Monty Python was growing up was just the perfect for this. This is something I, as a young person, just love so much.
yeah. They were the kings of madcap, and the British have a reputation for doing madcap better than Americans. Like, there's a few people in America that have done it really well, like the Three Stooges, and they did it a lot on Gilligan's Island. Three's
Yeah.
Company, and Jim Carrey is well known for, it's just like being wacky and physical and silly and funny faces and silly props, silly pratfalls, things like that. Most American comedy is very restrained.
Mm.
And I don't know why that is, because for me, madcap is often the garnish that really makes a joke a laugher. Just keep making it more silly,
Yeah.
especially if it's a bit or a short piece and you're escalating it to increase the madcap as you go. I was just watching this animated cartoon, Simon's Cat. I'm sure you guys have seen that. It's like got 40 million views on YouTube. And it's a cat trying to wake up a guy, simple line drawing animation. And the cat like scratches him and he taps him on the head and he pulls his ear. So he's escalating the ways that he's trying to wake this guy up. And the final beat is the cat disappears behind the bed and shows up with a huge baseball bat and just whacks him on the head. And then immediately hides the bat and pretends like he's sleeping on the bed. Great madcap joke. It's a great example of how you can escalate a bit to the point of madcap, because obviously at that point we expect it to get more absurd, and we accept that a cat can wield a baseball bat because we bought into the reality of at that point.
Sounds
Yeah.
sounds like that might be inspired a bit by Jim's journal with the way you described the animation. Very simple animation, but
Perhaps.
yeah, but no, I think in stand up, what we do is we talk a lot with our Joel Byers, our last guest, about act outs and
Right.
adding. You
Right.
said garnish, which is a nice way to put it. Once you've gained the confidence that what you're saying is funny, that it's communicated clearly, now you can add a little more to it with act outs and madcap.
Yeah. Now the act out to me is a way to inject character, because now you're playing a character in that scene.
Very good. I'm going to move on to one of everybody's favorites, which is parody. So the Onion article that we pulled was world death rate holding steady at 100%.
Yeah.
I took some liberty because everything the Onion does is parody. So
Yeah.
I picked one of my favorite Onion articles.
Well, you did a good job, because there's a parody within a parody in this article, and that's a parody of a survey or a statistical graph, where all the bars say 100%. But yeah, every story in the Onion is a parody of a newspaper article, and people have problems with that. They have an issue with, well, it's a format, but it's also a funny filter. Like the Onion, every story in the Onion is a parody of a newspaper article, but you can also parody things within articles. Like we've done so many articles that will be about like rookie cop aging cop hates rookie partner and stuff like that, which is parodying the standard buddy cop formula movie, you know.
And you've done work for Saturday Night Live. You know, that whole 45-year plus program has been all about parody, and it's done it very well.
Yeah, they are always parodying movies, TV shows. They parody the news, obviously, on Weekend Update, stuff like that.
So I'm going to move into our next funny filter. This one is analogy, and actually one of my favorites to do on stage.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Though hard to pull off. So let me share with you an Onion article real quick. Al Gore places infant son in rocket to escape dying planet.
That is one of my favorite Onion stories ever. I didn't come up with it, and I wasn't there when they printed it. I literally saw it on the street in a newspaper box, and I was so delighted because I think it's a perfect analogy. Like, it's such a beautiful analogy that really matches up. So Al Gore is being analogized with Jor-El of the Superman story. And there are so many parallels, and that's what makes analogy work so well. When you find these two disparate things that you normally don't think of as being related, and you find all these connection points. And every different connection point you can find is a joke beat. And that story is filled with them. There's so many. It's really just a wonderful piece. Everybody should look it up and read it.
Yeah, and in that, one of the other things I love about that is the illustration. Did y'all,
Right.
who illustrates that?
Well, that would have been Mike Lowe, Nick Gallo. That was the graphics team at the time. Amazingly talented guys.
Yeah, one of the reasons I like analogy so much is just fun to you get into that space where it's like, well, you have this object or this subject that you're talking about, and then you just allow your brain to word mapping and make connections. And I've got a couple bits that I really like. One, for example, I'm a runner, participate in a marathon, and so once as I unfold the joke, then it becomes how can I make this connection to the finish line and all the different things. So there's volunteers handing up bananas and granola bars. There's a tinfoil blanket, and so that you're able to tag the joke based on that. And so
Totally.
Those are my favorite to write, but they're very challenging and difficult to really pull off on stage from a stand-up perspective.
Yeah, there's a
lot of fun.
great example of analogy in an episode of Seinfeld. Did you ever see the one where he decided to switch barbers? He went with a younger barber because he'd been going to the same barber forever. And they decided to do that story as an analogy, as if Jerry was having an affair. So the barber, he invited the younger barber to his house to give him his haircut so he wouldn't be working at the shop where the older barber was, so he wouldn't see him. And then the older barber knocked on his door and he's like, "Oh my God, he's here. You have to hide." You know, so that's a trope of having an affair when you're in a relationship. And they mapped it on top of barbers. And it worked beautifully because the whole thing in a relationship where you find a hair on the collar, you know, the barber was able to do that. Aha, you have a new barber or whatever.
Yes, that's right. I do. Okay, now
you remember that episode.
I do.
Yeah, so that's a great example. I mean, those guys, Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld, are masters of comedy writing. And that show uses all the funny filters brilliantly. So it's a great show to look at.
Yeah, and from a stand-up perspective, or really from any comedy, I would imagine, is you have to set it up in the beginning and set it up strong to make sure that they all understand it. Yeah. And if it's written really well, they can enter at any point. But really, you don't want to mention the thing. You want it to be understood.
People who do analogy wrong always try to be cagey about it. And they try to make the audience work too hard to figure out what two things they're comparing. And that's the mistake. You want to, like you said, it should be as easy as possible to get. One of the things has to be overt. You have to mention it. The other one has to be secret. So in the Seinfeld example, the overt one was barbers. It was all about the barber and switching barbers and getting haircuts. They never mentioned having an affair. They never mentioned being unfaithful. Like, they just used tropes from that scenario mapped on top of the barber. So in the Al Gore story, same thing. At no point in that article does it say, "So you see, Al Gore is like Jor-El and his son is like Superman. Like that would be like revealing your subtext. You never do that. You just point out the similarities. So in the article, they call him Gor-Al, which makes you think of Jor-El, you know, but you don't ever say Jor-El. And they talk about the Council of Elders and like, you know, the planet dying, everything. It matches so beautifully.
Very good. I'm going to move on to our next filter, which is one that's very often used in stand-up, misplaced focus, or we might call it a misdirect, I would think. But
yeah, it's typically misdirect. Like Anthony Jeselnik is the king of that in stand-up.
Absolutely. So the article reads, secondhand smoke linked to secondhand coolness.
Yeah, so the misplaced focus there is that secondhand smoke is dangerous, and we're ignoring that and focusing on something unimportant instead. So that's how misplaced focus works. You think of something that's really important that people should really care about, and you make them think of that thing by focusing on the wrong thing.
Man,
it's really that simple.
I love that so much. I love when, to me, that's like, it kind of it's like almost a minor shock because there's something big going on in the scene. Almost like, you know, a Family Guy kind of uses this maybe a lot.
Sure.
There's something going on, and then they focus on the tiniest, most unimportant detail and just beat it to death until you're finally, you give in and you have to laugh.
Right. Yeah, that's, they're good at the overkill joke, that where you do a joke over and over and over. It's funny at first, then it gets unfunny, and then it starts to get funny again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm gonna move to the very last comedy filter. I can't believe we've already gone through 11. The last one is Metahumor. And the example from The Onion is, I just discovered this hilarious comic strip called Garfield.
Yeah, so metahumor is a lot of fun. It's when you make fun of other humor, or you make fun of the idea of humor. You deconstruct humor in a very humorless way. Steve Martin was kind of the king of metahumor. He would make fun of his whole act by calling it hilarious comedy jokes, you know. And a subset of metahumor is called anti-humor, which is what Andy Kaufman used to do, where he'd get up on stage and do something totally unfunny, like eat ice cream, and the audience would get upset. And that's like a whole nother like experiment in comedy. Yeah. Audiences doing anti-humor is always risky, but it can be cultish. But yeah, metahumor is a lot of fun. My favorite, we talked about Monty Python earlier. One of my favorite metahumor jokes comes from them. It's the world's deadliest joke. Remember that sketch?
I'm not sure if I do.
It's brilliant. It's such a great sketch. It's where a guy writes the funniest joke in the world, and it's so funny that anyone who reads it dies laughing. So he writes it, and then he himself dies.
Okay. Yeah.
And then his wife comes in the room, and she's mortified because he's died, but she picks up what he wrote, and she starts laughing, and she dies. And so it's this whole skit where the British government discovers the joke, and they try to translate it into German so they can use it in the war. And they have soldiers running through the battlefield reading this German version of the joke, and Germans are dropping dead from it. It's just wonderful. Like, those guys were so good.
Oh, that is absolutely that is absolutely amazing. Oh man.
I consider Monty Python to be like the Rosetta Stone of modern comedy.
Oh yeah. I couldn't imagine my childhood without it. Like, it just opened up a door to a silliness and putting a lot of effort into something that seemingly is kind of dumb, but the effort they put into these dumb jokes makes them brilliant.
And they were all so smart, like so well educated,
right?
Multiple, languages, and just this insane Oxford and Cambridge education that they had. And then to do like the silliest stuff. It was a wonderful combination of like smart and dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the coconuts. Even that is just the most smallest little touch that goes,
And it came from, they couldn't afford horses.
Yeah.
Like they literally couldn't afford horses in the budget. So they just used coconuts. It's a great joke.
And then they do have some meta humor about the coconuts. A few.
Oh
moments.
yeah, they're
They
filled
get
with
called.
meta humor.
They get called out like, you didn't ride here. You banging two coconuts together.
Right.
So that was the 11 funny filters. Do you want to share with us a little bit about where that comes from, the book series, the podcast, and the school? Just kind of put that out there so people know how to find more.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so the book that those are all explained in, how to use them and how to work with them, is called How to Write Funny. And that's on Amazon, and there's an audiobook. And then there's 2 sequels. How to Write Funnier, the second book, is all about how to expand those jokes into a longer piece or a bit. And then the third book, How to Write Funniest, is how to use a comedy team to amplify the quality of your humor exponentially. And then, so the website is howtowritefunny.com, where I offer courses where people can get hands-on help from me and stuff like that.
Very good.
Yeah, and the podcast, also called How to Write Funny, that's on the website, howtowritefunny.com. Also interviews with comedians, comedy writers, people behind the scenes, just people talking in the weeds about how the comedy business works and how they write jokes, and a lot of inspiration from a lot of different people, some super famous, some super unknown, but all with really interesting things to say.
I would also encourage anyone to get out there and grab the book Outrageous Marketing, because if you have any interest in the backstory, I think, of Scott, where you came from, and also obviously the backstory of the Onion, amazingly so much insights in many different areas, and one of those books I think that like leaves you pretty encouraged, ready to do your own thing, and so I just appreciate you putting that out as well.
Yeah, thanks for saying so. I'm glad you liked it.
So as we land this plane, Scott, there's one last thing that we like to do. It's a bit morbid, so bear with us. We call it last laugh. So you have a limited amount of space, which you're good at, to put on your tombstone. What would you like to have as your last laugh?
So I got one for you. I do like a short headline. Like some of the best Onion headlines have been 3, sometimes even 2 words, and the holy grail is like the 1-word joke. And so I think I came up with a 1-word joke for my tombstone that would make anyone who looked at it laugh. Anybody walking through the cemetery who sees that is going to laugh. And so why not? Like, that'd be great, right? So what my tombstone would say is simply fucked. Like what teenager walking through the cemetery wouldn't just laugh out loud at that one? Either they wouldn't get it. It would be an unwitting laugh because it'd be like, ha ha, that dude's name was fucked. Or they would just think that it was really funny and clever. So you get them whether they were smart or dumb.
We should have known that Scott Dikkers would murder this, well, literally, this game right here. Appreciate that one.
Sure.
You win. Yeah, I used to walk my way. I used to have to go through a cemetery to get home from school, and you better believe me and my young adolescent friends would be rolling in the graveyard grass.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, hey, Scott, we really do appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Sure, my pleasure.
Very, very sage advice and stuff that can help everybody who's in comedy. So
I hope so.
Yeah, and also don't forget, how can we find you on social media?
I'm at Scott Dikkers on Twitter, and it's Scott Dikkers on Instagram, and my Facebook page I think also is It's Scott Dikkers, because there's no other Scott Dickerses, but somebody somehow got Scott Dikkers on Facebook and Instagram. That's all right, whatever. But yeah, and I also you can Google me, like that stuff comes up pretty easy. Oh, and my name is spelled Dikkers. Almost everybody mispronounces it or misspells it Dick. So,
well, thanks again for coming on. Like, it's an absolute dream to get to chat with you after reading all your books and everything.
It's so nice of you to say. It was a delight.
Can't encourage people to read your stuff enough. It's so powerful and helpful to me. So thank you for caring about investing in other comics and sharing your journey along the way. It's super helpful and in all the ways. So really appreciate that.
Thanks for saying so, Drew. You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Come get us next Friday with Mr. Rick Roberts. Same time, same place. Big Guy. This is Breaking Down Bits, and we are out of here.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Down Bits. You can keep in touch or get more when you follow @Breaking Down Bits on social media, visit the website breakingdownbits.com, or shoot us an email at breakingdownbits@gmail.com.